Good evening. This week's parsha, Parshas Emor, has all of the inyanim of the Yomim Tovim in it. It talks about Yom Kippur, it talks about Pesach, it talks about Shavuos and Sukkos, and it goes through all of the Yomim Tovim. Interestingly, in the middle of all of this discussion about the Yomim Tovim, it has a pasuk, "Uvekutzrechem es ketzir artzachem lo sachala pa'asodcha bekutzrecha v'leket v'shikcha lo salaket." The pasuk goes into leket, shikcha, and peah. And the Mefarshim are very curious. Why smack in the middle of all of the discussion about the Yomim Tovim would it have such a pasuk right in the middle of it? Now, the Rabbeinu Balkany, the Bais Yaakov, talks about the Bais Yaakov mainly, talks about the inyan that people are accustomed to do something that they understand should be done, but on the other hand, if it's not a tzivui, it's not a pasuk in the Torah, then let's say it's raining cats and dogs outside and it's hard to do the mitzvah. So what the Bais Yaakov says is that basically if a person didn't have the pasuk in the Torah, then it would become under certain circumstances, no matter how understandable, and we would say, oh, of course, you have to do this, or give the tzedakah, or give the leket and shikha, the payah, to the poor people, why leave them out? That it would come to times that we would navigate between the areas of question, allowing someone to skip a year. So says the Bais Yaakov. And we know that the Zohar HaKadosh says that when it comes, for instance, to Pesach, and specifically the Zohar HaKadosh says it about Pesach, if someone doesn't have a guest at their table, they should know that they're not yotzes simchas yom tiv. So, in the middle of all of these tzivuyim about Yomim Tovim and Yom Kippur and everything about it, we tuck in this pasuk because the backbone of Klal Yisrael is the Amud HaChesed that it has, and that is the surviving hero that transports Klal Yisrael into Geula, and that's why by tzedakah, it's the only place that it says that it's Mevi Geula. There's no other inyan that it talks about bringing Geula or Tatzil Mimoves, that if a person wants an antidote because he's not well, and the doctor didn't give him chas v'sholom lo aleinu lo aleichem such good news, then he would be able to have as an additional shield to protect himself the tzedakah, that it's not just for the oni that you're giving to. You're getting the greater benefit, and you are able to cloak yourself in the shield of Geula and Tatzil Mimoves. And therefore the pasuk of tzedakah, just like by the Yom Tovim that we all keep, there's no question about that, a person has to keep. So too should he look at the inyan of tzedakah, leket, shikcha, and peah the same way that it's a must and it's a backbone in the structure of his life. Now, we know that the pasuk at the very beginning of the Sedra says, Emor el hakohanim v'amarto aleim lenefesh lo yitama b'yamav. That the first segment of the Sedra talks to the kohanim. There was a tzivui to tell them about certain inyonei tumah. They can't defile themselves when they're dealing with niftarim, that only 7 close relatives are they allowed to go to the levaya of, and others they're not allowed to. The Kohen Gadol, as the pasuk clearly says, is not allowed to go even to his own parents' levaya. That he is only allowed to go to a meis mitzvah. A meis mitzvah is when you find a body that no one can care for it, so there's bizoyin hames, there's a mistreatment and disrespect to just leaving a body there. So even a Kohen Gadol who can't go to any other levaya is allowed to go and take care of the nifter, the dead body that he finds wherever. And, many people think they could never be zoicha to a mitzvah, meis mitzvah, because, who would be found today in the middle of the street or in the middle of an area that would bring, please close the door there. That there would be a circumstance that we could be Makayim Meis Mitzvah. I get calls from the hospital sometime. Somebody died, there are no relatives, and there's no one to take care of the kvura. That's a Meis Mitzvah. That's a situation that a person today in 2024 can be Makayim a Meis Mitzvah. So the Kohen Gadol could do that, but he could not. But he could not begin any type of involvement with someone that was nifter. Now, Rashi and the Meforshim are curious. Why would it say a double lashon of Emor? It begins, Emor el hakohanim. And then it says, V'amarto aleihem. So Rashi says, Lahazir gedolim ala katanim. That the first tzivui is to the gedolim, to the kohanim that are adults, how careful they have to be. And the second Emor is a reference to what they have to tell to all of the children, the young Kohanim, that if a child is playing next to a cemetery and he's a Kohen, he has to know that he's not allowed to run into the cemetery after the baseball. So children have to know and be sensitive to all the inyanim, tahara, and kedusha of a Kohen, more so than anything else. But the Bais Yaakov says that the first one is to adults, and the second, via Marta, is also to the adults. But why would you have to say it twice? If the first one is to adults, so they already know the inyone kahuna. Why say it, especially again, say via Marta and mean the adults? So the message he says is, no, it's for the children. but we're giving the message to the adults, because if the adults set the lifelike example of how they have to live, then that is going to deliver the loudest message, more than sitting down a child and giving him A and B and C, but lifelike living. And from time to time, I have said to you that when a father opens up a Gemara at night and the child comes out and sees after a day's work, and after being so harassed and so involved and running to the minyanim, and sits down and doesn't plop into the bed, but he goes to the table and takes out the Gemara, or the Mishnayos, or the Chumash, and the son sees him, that's the biggest lifetime example. And that, says the Bais of, is the V'yamarto Aleim, that we're telling it to you, but in turn it's really a message to the children, because how you act is going to be the lifelike lesson for the children and what they have to do. So the pasuk in general, there's a pasuk in the Sedra in Emor, V'lo sechalalu as Shem kodshi, v'nikdashti besoch b'nei Yisrael. And the Meforshim are curious, why would it say besoch b'nei Yisrael? I mean, who else? We're talking about Kiddush Hashem. And by the way, Kiddush Hashem, the Chavetz Chaim said once that people think that to be Mekayim the Inyan of Kiddush Hashem, that we have examples, conjured up in our minds of people being lined up. And of course, that was the ultimate of Kiddush Hashem. What happened with Yidden in the Holocaust, what happened with Yidden walking down the street and people never, screaming at them, dirty Jew, and they just picking up their head and going further on their journey and ignoring, that's also Kiddush Hashem. But the Chavetz Chaim said that when a Yid says Kedusha, Kadosh, 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 and Baruch Kavod Hashem Mimkomo, he's being Mekayim Kiddush Hashem D'Oraisa, because the fact that he is proclaiming and looking up to HaKadosh Baruch Hu as he says it, that is a format, even if the person is never killed or put up in front of a firing squad, that he can be Mekadesh Shem Shamayim and be Mekadesh this pasuk of V'nikdashti besoch b'nei Yisrael. We know that Kedusha, the first time that it's spoken of, is by Yaakov Avinu, that when he was fighting with the angel, and the angel said, please send me, let me go. And the Medrash explains, because even though the angels were created in the 6 days of creation at the very beginning, that every malach, every angel was assigned to one time in their existence that they are allowed to be able to say Kedusha. When we say V'kara Zel, Zevi Omar, and it goes from one level of malachim, of angels, to the next level. But what sets it off is when Yidden down here say Kedusha, then it opens the opportunity for all of the angels, the malachim, to be able to say in unison, V'kara Zel, Zevi Omar, and then Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh. And the first group, the first place we find it is Yaakov Avinu lived like 2,100 years after creation. And that means that the Malach that he was fighting with was waiting 2,100 years to say Kedusha. and never said it before and never said it again. And had Yaakov Avinu not released him and would have continued the fight, then that malach would never in his existence have been able, because that was his designation that day. And only because Yaakov Avinu, when the malach said, Shalcheni ki Allah ha'shachar, that now it's my turn to say Kedusha, that had he not released him, then he never in his existence would have had the opportunity. The lesson to us, of course, is we can be in a shul where there's 10 minyanim shachris, and if the yid wanted, he could go from one minyan to the next and say Kedusha. Look at the schos. Here the malach had to wait 2,100 years to say it once. And we can go into a shul and say Kedusha 2 times, 3 times, 4 times. It's not a chiyuv to do it, but I'm just talking about opportunity that we have as a Klal Yisrael, and that we should value it and enjoy it and be nisala. We should go up into the realm of that type of Kedusha where Kedusha carries us. And many hold that the Yehei Shmei Rabbah is even bigger than the Kedusha. Like Toisus and Brachas and Daf Beis says that if someone says Yehei Shmei Rabbah with a tremendous kavana, that he opens up the door to tear up a gezar din, that a decree that could be out there against him or his family. And it could be hanging over them even a gezar din of 70 years, meaning that the family could fall on hard times, and that remains hanging over them, the umbrella of that gezerah, that decree, for 70 years. And one Yehei Shmei Rabbah with kavana can wipe it out completely. Now, we know that there is at the end of the story, the end of the entire parsha, the story of the Makallel. It means somebody went out in front of everyone and cursed HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's called blasphemy in English. In the Gemara, we don't call it that he cursed HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We say he was mevorech es Hashem, because we put it into a more positive, palatable lashon, that it sounds a lot nicer to say mevorech, even though it doesn't mean mevorech. It means the exact opposite of mevorech. But in referring to it, Ladoros, we refer to it as mevorech es Hashem. And the story is that at the end of the Sedra, he went out, it says, Vayetze Ish. He went out, and he cursed Hashem, and they didn't know what to do with him. What the psak halach is, someone that does that, and he had to be put into jail until they got the psak from HaKadosh Baruch Hu that he is put to death. That if somebody does it, and he's warned as he's about to do it, there's hasra, that he ends up being put to death. Now the Gemara asks, that pasuk says, Vayetze, he went out. So they ask, from where did he come out that he went to do such a terrible thing? And the Gemara answers, he came out of the parsha right before. The parsha almost immediately, there's one other pasuk stuck in there, we're going to talk about it in just a minute, but the story of what happened was that there is a few psukim that talk about the lechem haponim, that we know that there was a table in the Kodesh, there was the table, there was the menorah, and there was the Mizbeach HaZohav, where they had the Ketoris. Those 3 items were in the Kodesh, not the Kodesh HaKadoshim. And the table had on it 12 breads that were put on each and every week, and they were taken off, and the Kohanim were able to eat. And it was a Kiddush Hashem because these breads were put on, and after a week they were taken off and they were eaten, and they were as fresh and as warm as the minute that they were put on the week before. And the new ones were immediately put on, and they were lefonai tomid, so there had to be constant. You couldn't take off the breads and wait 2 hours and put the next ones on. They had to be taken off, and immediately the new breads were put on. So the Medrash says that this man said, what kind of a crazy halacha of putting breads and after a week taking them off and giving the stale breads? He didn't wait to the end of the week to realize that they were not stale. They were coming off as fresh as could be. But that was his taina of that was the taina of this man. Now, there was another story in the Gemara where somebody was taken off. That was a Makoshesh Eitzim on Shabbos. He was Machal Shabbos, and the same thing happened. They had to put him on the side because they didn't know the halacha. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu told Moshe that you have to take him out, and he was also put to death. And the Benos Tzolofchad, who at the end of the Chumash, Bamidbar, were the ones who came to Moshe Rabbeinu with the claim that our father died in the Midbar, and we're 5 spinster sisters. They all ended up getting married, but at that point they were older, and none of them of the 5 were married. And they said, why should we lose the chelik in Eretz Yisrael? We should be allowed. And they asked, Moshe Rabbeinu asked HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and he said, Kain Dovros Benos Tzolofchad. And they did get a portion. Even though they were girls, they were not boys, and usually the ben is Yoirish. But Meforshim say, the Gemara says, some hold he was the father of the Benos Tzolofchad who died in the Midbar. Some say he was the Makoshe Sheitzim, and some say he was the Mevarich es Hashem, the one that cursed HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And the Medrash continues and says that if we go all the way back to Dasan and Aviram, remember those 2 troublemakers who, at the time Moshe Rabbeinu came out and saw a Mitzri was about to kill someone, and he killed the Mitzri, the Egyptian, to save the Jew. And that Jew that was saved was Dasan. And even though he saved his life, the next day when Moshe Rabbeinu killed the Mitzri, he killed the Mitzri, and when he came out the next day and he criticized the 2 Yidden for fighting, and one of them said, oh, are you going to kill us the way you killed yesterday the Mitzri? And he went to Paro and he snitched on Moshe Rabbeinu, and he had to become a fugitive. He ran away. Why did Moshe Rabbeinu kill this Mitzri? Because this Mitzri saw Dasan's wife and was enticed to be with her, to be intimate. And this Mitzri came at the end of the night when it was still dark, and he came into the house or the tent of Dasan, and he said, "You're late for work, you have to get up." And he rushed him out of the house, and then he violated his wife. And Dasan came back to the house, and the wife said, "I thought you left. And in the relationship, I thought that was you." And Dasan realized that this Mitzri wanted to pull him out to go to work, only to be able to violate his wife, and he came to kill him. The Dasan was very angry, and at the end they had the fight, and the Mitzri wanted to kill him, and Moshe Rabbeinu saved him. Now, and there was a child born from that union, from that violation. And the people told him, to the son, "Do you know that Moshe Rabbeinu killed your father?" And that's when he went out and cursed, because he was angry to hear that his father was killed by Moshe Rabbeinu because of this whole story. Nevertheless, we have a pasuk between the Lechem Haponim and the parsha of this Megadef, the one that cursed HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And it's one pasuk, Make behema yishalmeno. No, it's more than one pasuk. And about hitting an animal, and if you kill the animal, then there's payment, and there's this, and there's that. And the Meforshim are curious, after talking about the Lechem Haponim and the Shulchan, suddenly this thing about behemoths and animals, and that you have to be responsible and you have to pay if you harm them or you kill them. And then it talks about the Megadif. It's like right in between. So the Meforshim ask, what is it doing here? And they answer and say, because why was the Megadif killed? Because he took the gift of speech and he was able to violate the speech and curse HaKadosh Baruch Hu. An animal cannot speak with whatever he wants to. There is a power of speech, but it's very defined and very, very limited. And that's why this comes right there. Because from the Lechem upon him that he thought was so crazy, and then he went out and cursed HaKadosh Baruch Hu, what kind of a mitzvah, what kind of a tzivui is this? He didn't learn up even from an animal who would have loved to have been able to express himself the way a human being does, and to protect the sanctity and the importance of every word of speech. And he went and he cursed, and he used the power of speech against HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that, say the Meforshim, is why right in between we talk about animals, because you didn't learn up the value of every word that you can say from the animals who are dying to say and want to say, and they have very limited use of the power of speech with the other animals. And we know that the biggest power of Ayin Hara is through speech. That means if somebody is jealous of someone and they say something, that can hurt them terribly, because even though in Mishlei Shlomo HaMelech says that Kilulas Chacham al Tovo, that when a person curses, a Yid curses another Yid, that doesn't mean it has to happen. Just the fact that he cursed him, that doesn't mean he's at the level of a tzaddik gomer, that whatever he says will take heed and come about. But still, when Rav went into the cemetery, the Gemara in Baba Metzia says that he asked 100 deceased, why and when did you die? And 99, the Gemara says, answered him that I died from an ayin hara, and I was supposed to live so many years, and I ended up dying 20 years before or 15 years before their time that they were destined. And the Gemara says that he only found one out of the whole 100 that died naturally and lived all the years that he was given. So when we speak about others, we have to be very careful that it could be that the other Yid is doing something, that there is rugza, there's roigas, there's an anger from Shemayim there, and therefore it will kick in the curse against them, the ayin hara, or not. So a person doesn't know behind the scenes what's happening and where everything is up to. So we just have to know that we have to take the power of speech and be as kind and gracious as humanly possible, and to be able to carry the day with nicety and with love. And I saw in Shul the other day that there were two people talking, and the minyan was taking off, and these two were standing there with their talis in the hand, but they didn't begin davening. They didn't put on the talis, they didn't put on. So somebody came over to them and said, why should you let the minyan wither away? They're going to be up to Shemon Esrei before you even put on your talis and tefillin. And when he said it to them, he took out his arm, his hand, and he rubbed the person, like gave him a nice tap on the back, like a loving tap. So the person said, okay, we're stopping to talk, and we're going to start to daven right now. And he turned to the man who rebuked them and said, and it's not because the minyan is davening away, it's because you did it nicely with your hand and out of love. So a long way goes when a parent speaks to a child or a teacher speaks to a student, when they do whatever they do, and even if it's a criticism, but if it's a harsh criticism, it can turn the other person off and away. And if he does it in a loving way, he can capture his soul and he can be a good friend with him the rest of his life. Now, there is a question that the pasuk says, "Umin hamikdash lo yetze," by the Kohen Gadol, he was not during the day allowed to leave the Beis Hamikdash, and when he went home or whatever, he was never allowed to step out of Yerushalayim. And the Mefarshim are curious. If he was 18 hours in the Beis Hamikdash, he had, as the Rambam says, a lishkas kohen gadol. He had an office that was reserved only for him, and that his whole day, if he wasn't busy doing X, Y, or Z, he had to sit in the office. Now, the Mefarshim are curious, if he was a Kohen Gadol, let's say like Yochanan, 80 years a Kohen Gadol, didn't he go crazy from just sitting in the office? But the answer is this, that when somebody in Olam Hazeh soaks and drenches themselves with ruchnius, then the atmosphere of the physicality and the gashmius of this world does not seep into them. And just like when a person is in Gan Eden, that he could go up after he dies and be part and parcel of a heichel where they're learning and doing mitzvahs, they're learning a whole time. So people would think, isn't the guy going to get bored? What do you mean? He's got to go into a room and sit with a Gemara or a Kisvei Ari or Mishnayos, and that's what he's doing. And that's called Gan Eden. That he's going to be doing that 24 hours a day. So the answer is that even tzaddikim that were here in Olam Hazeh, which was not Olam Haba, that they were able to go. There were many tzaddikim that never took in their lives, and they lived to 100 or to 95, a vacation. Now a normal person who's not a tzaddik Omer comes 6 months, 8 months, a year, 2 years, 3 years. At a point he says, I have to get away a little bit. Change of scenery, change of this, that, and that you could shift gears. But if someone was a tzaddik gomer here in Olam Hazeh, his pleasantness and his wonderful, the veneer and the mitzias, the atzmias of his personality was graciousness, with happiness, with luster, in the best of it, even if he was sitting for 50 years in a office. The Lubavitcher Rebbe, that was a case in point. He didn't go on a vacation and sat 18 hours a day in his office. And when people came into him, they said, wow, he was like exuding such atmosphere of greatness and of happiness that like the most content person in the world. Why was that happening? That was happening because he was so drenched with the ruchnius, he didn't need the limitations and the shortcomings and the demands of being a gashmi. And there were so many. I mean, you take the Rosh Yeshiva in Eretz Yisrael, Rav Michal Yehuda Lefkowitz and Rav Steinman, they all lived to over 100. And they were really sitting a whole day with their Gemaras or with people who needed eitzes and what to do. Yet there was laughter, there was pleasantness, and they were not bursting from their scenes because they didn't have this nakuda of never leaving their home or their office or their Gemara or their Stender. And that shows us that it's possible for a person to strive and to thrive in the area of ruchnius and become so holy through the Torah and through the level of neshama that he was given, that he can pierce through the barriers of all the gashmias and be enveloped and completely drenched with the ruchnius and reflect that level of attachment with HaKadosh Baruch Hu and all of the ruchnius that he is into in his lifetime. Now, And we find that David HaMelech, who lived 70 years, and he was king, he was Melech Yisrael for 40 years, and his son, Shlomo HaMelech, became king right after him and was also king for 40 years. But Shlomo HaMelech was 12 years old when he became king, and he also was king for 40 years, and he was nifter at 52, Shlomo HaMelech. And before David HaMelech died, before he was nifter, he said to Shlomo HaMelech, his son, I'm about to die, and Shimei ben Gera was myriad b'malchus, and there is a death sentence over him because of that. And I have my reasons that I do not want to kill him and put him to death. And I'm going to leave it up to you that after I leave this world, that you will have an eitzah of how to kill him. Not b'derech hateva, not like a regular death sentence that you take a gun, you shoot someone, or a sword, and you kill them. So after David HaMelech was nifter, the Chazal say, Shlomo HaMelech told Shimei ben Gera, listen, Shimei, as long as you stay in Yerushalayim, you can live to 100. But the day you leave Yerushalayim, you are a dead man. And it says, Chazal bring it, that Shimei ben Gera had some servants, and 2 of them escaped. And they ran away. And they ran out of Yerushalayim. And when Shimei ben Gera heard this, he was incensed, and he went after to capture and to find them and bring them back. And as soon as he left Yerushalayim, Shlomo HaMelech said to him, you are a dead man. And he ran off to a city that we find in Tanakh, and no one in the city, it was a walled city, and when the army of Shlomo came to fetch him and to kill him, so the city, which was a walled city, said, we don't know if we're allowed to give him over to you. Are we allowed to take a yid, and we know that you're going to kill him, and give him to you to kill him? So it says in the pasuk there in Tanakh that they were not sure what they had to do. So they went to an Isha Zakena, an elderly woman who lived in their walled city. And they asked her the Shaila, and she said to them, yes, he was a myriad b'malchus, he's chayav misa, that he does have a death, and they sent him out and he was killed. Who was this Isha Zakena, this elderly woman? Say the Chazal, Rashi says, Zu Serach Bas Osher. Osher, one of the 12 Shvatim, the Shiftei Ka, had a daughter, Serach, who when Yosef came back home to his father, she was playing, some say it was a violin, some say it was a harp, music. And to soften the blow and the shock of telling Yaakov that Yosef is alive and that maybe he would have had a heart attack, the pasuk even says, she was playing the music and singing it to him to soften the demand on his health. But the pasuk says, Vayofag libo, that his heart jumped, he almost had a heart attack and died. He didn't, but he was like in such a state of shock. And Sarah, because she did this, when she got done playing the harp and telling Yaakov Avinu that Yosef was alive through her singing, he gave her a bracha for longevity. Now, we know that Serach Bas Osher is buried in Iran, And many people before Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur go to her kever, in addition to Mordechai and Esther, who are buried in Iran. And those three graves they go to, and some go over to Iraq, to Yechezkel Hanavi, who's buried in Iraq. But they go to Serach Bas Asher, and he gave a bracha that she should live long. And she ended up, from following her through from Yaakov Avinu's time to this story of Shimi ben Gera, that we find that it was like a period of 700 to 800 years. But after that, no, she didn't live forever. But when she was buried in Iran, and that's how the army of Shlomo HaMelech got a hold of her and was able to fulfill the request of David HaMelech, and it was done in this unusual way with never leaving Yerushalayim, and he ran after his two servants that escaped, and that's when he himself put the death sentence on himself. And unfortunately, I would like to say that we look at the story like he was told if he leaves Yerushalayim, he's a dead man. Why did he do it? He didn't need the two slaves. Because every person decides their destiny. With our mouths, with our actions. It wasn't just Shimi ben Gera. We do, stupid things that shorten our life, that shorten the success of our families. We do things which are so full, and they work against us. We're the ones doing it to ourselves, like Shimi ben Gera did when he left Yerushalayim. Now, there's a famous question asked. We are in the middle of the days of the Omer. That means we count Sfira, we count Sfira Omer. Omer was the name of the korban. We do not find anywhere that a korban that we brought was named after what the korban was for, or that was given a name of the mitzvah itself. That means, let's say a person was Mechal Shabbos by mistake, he had to bring a korban chatas. It was called a chatas, but it wasn't called a name that we designated it as the korban, that the korban was a korban oimer, and we call it oimer, because that was the korban. And we do over here, in this case, we do call it oimer. So, interestingly, Meforshim, to answer this question, why we call the korban that was brought on the second day of Pesach, which was mater all of the chodosh. That means when a farmer piled up a ton of wheat and he wanted to bake matzah or bake bread or do anything, that and let's say this was in the middle of Shvat, he was ready with all of the wheat. He couldn't do anything with it. That was still chodosh. That when they brought the korban omer, the second day of Pesach, it was matir, all of the chodosh. And that's why some bakeries have in their windows, we are careful to only use the flour of Yoshan, that it already has passed. Now today there's no korban omer. So what do? Just the zman, the time we passed, the second day of Pesach when the korban omer was brought, and that is mater all of the chodosh. And bakeries have in there, we are careful with chodosh and yoshan. And they're telling you that they do not in any which way, they are telling everyone that they are not using the flour of chodosh, but it's flour of yoshan. Now, so why was the omer the only korban of all the korbanos that we called the korban and the mitzvah on the name and gave it the korban the name of the mitzvah for the Omer. And the answer, they say, is that how did Yidden live in the Midbar? There was mun. The amount of the mun that came down for each person every day is an omer. That's a measurement. An omer. And what was the most important aspect of the korban omer? The fact that it brought down the mun, and that the mun was the parnasa of Yidden. So the parnasa of Yidden, we want to say Chazal, tzaddikim, we call it omer, the korban, we gave it the name of the mitzvah because it was the amount of how they lived. That was a korban, that was the mun that came down, the amount that came down was an omer. And since that was the sustenance and the parnasa for Yidden, we want you to know that just like you had to look outside and see that the omer of mun came down, and that gave you life and sustenance, and you were able to live another day because you had what to eat, that was the message of the omer. And since the message was parnasa, and that you look to heaven for your parnasa, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu sends you what He wants to send you, therefore, we gave that one korban the name of what its mitzvah was. And that's why we call it, to teach Yidden that when you want to have parnasa, lift your eyes to heaven, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu will give you, when you have your emunah in Him, that He's giving everything that comes to you. Now, the halacha I want to first tell you that the Arizal went on a rowboat with his Talmud, Reb Chaim Vital. Bnei Yissaschar brings this in the Chodesh Iyar, where we are now. And what does the Arizal say? The Arizal told them in that rowboat that they were in the Kinneret, right outside of Tveria, and the Arizal told Reb Chaim Vital to take a cup and to take out some water, fill the cup with water from the Kinneret, and drink, make a bracha and drink from that water. And Reb Chaim Vital realized after he drank from that cup that never again in his life, when he learned Zohar or Kabbalah secrets of the Torah, did he have difficulty in understanding what it said. That means many times he learned and he had to ponder, he had to think, he had to delve into his olam hamachshava to come out what the pshat was. And now after drinking this cup of water, he understood it immediately. So he asked the Arizal, what happened? So Arizal says, because the place that I told you to take the cup and take water and make a bracha, and you drank, was the Be'era Shel Miriam. That the Be'er of Miriam and that overflowing fountain of her Be'er is in the Kinneret at some place. The Arizal knew where it was. And that's the Mayonos HaChochma, and that's why you were Zoicha to this beautiful gift from heaven, because you drank from that Mayon. Now, I want to tell you that in the Sedra it says that the Kohen Gadol was not allowed to marry anyone. In other words, a regular Kohen could not marry a Grusha. So today, if someone, let's say, a woman got divorced, and they spoke her a shidduch, and the man is a Kohen, they can't get married. There's an Isser D'Oraisa of a Kohen marrying a divorced woman. Now with a Kohen Gadol, he not only cannot marry a Grusha, a divorced woman, but he can't marry even a woman who was an almana, a widow. Now a regular Kohen could marry an almana, but a Kohen Gadol cannot marry an almana. And the Gemara discusses this, and Tosfos in that Gemara asks a question: why was the Kohen Gadol forbidden by the Torah to marry an almana? We see that every Kohen could marry an almana. And the answer given in that Tosfos is, Tosfos says, a chosid echad gave the answer, and many say that it was the friend of the Balei Tosfos, Rabbi Yehuda HaChosid, who the Balei Tosfos said that he could be Machayim Mesim like Tanoim. That's how big he was. So he says that the reason that a Kohen Gadol could not marry an almana was because since when the Kohen Gadol went in on Yom Kippur to the Kodesh Kadoshim, and when he was saying the Shem HaMeforish, he could think anything he wanted, and it happened. So if he saw a woman that he desired, and let's say she was married, that he could, in the Kodesh, as unbelievable as this is, in the Kodesh HaKadoshim B'Yom HaKippurim, have a machshava, a wish that the husband should die so that he should be able to marry the woman. So we asked her, because he was the only one allowed to ever go into the Kodesh Kadoshim, and he was the only one that said the Shema Meforish B'Yom HaKippurim. But at that moment, while he was doing it, anything he thought of that he wanted, that he wished for, he was granted. And we were afraid that he saw a woman that he knew who it was, and she was, I guess, exceedingly well-groomed or pretty or whatever, and he wanted her, and we were afraid that on Yom Kippur, B'Yom HaKippurim, in the holiest place of the world, the Kodesh HaKadoshim, he would have a machshava that her husband should die, so he should be able to go marry her. Unbelievable. So it shows the power of the Torah in protecting Klal Yisrael. I mean, here was a holy man that he lived through Yom Kippur, and he came back to the people successful. He got the slicha, the mechila, the kapara, and he was so big, and he lived through it. We're choshing him that he's going to want to kill a husband so he could marry the... That's what Rabbi Yehuda HaChosid in Tosfos says. So the Eibishter should help us that our wishes and our machshavas should be pure and should be good and should have the holiness and the resemblance of the Ratzon of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in each and every machshava that we have, dibur that we have, and maisim in olam hazeh.